It's always stories that bind us and ignite us. And Nandini and I met with the one such story. Bakul shared, I lost my younger brother. And when I did, I was led to reading Nandini's book called Left Behind, which she had written about surviving suicide loss of her husband. And in exploring that book and her journey, we then came together and went on yet another. And in the course of that, really realizing the value of community and building a tribe. And one after the other, these conversations started happening with women, some friends, some colleagues, some strangers, and really starting to look at how comfortable and happy people are to share their lived experiences and their journeys, and what might that take. So this was for us a bit of an experimental endeavor. I haven't seen too many first person accounts in the way that this book holds, and then all those contributors present in the room. So very, very grateful to all of you. There are 11 women who are in this book, featuring their life stories and also the learnings and insights from those stories. And so very grateful for that. Some of them are here today and some were present with us at the Delhi launch. And we started asking ourselves, what do we really need in order to do this? And I think the realization was that just a sense of safety, a sense of being held and being listened to, is essentially what it took to come together and really go on this very, very healing journey together. In the course of this journey, we have actually come across many parts of ourselves that we may have left behind. We've had difficult conversations with our own family members in a way that we haven't in the last 2 or 3 decades. And it's been quite liberating, to say the least, for us individually. Now, when we think about everybody coming together and becoming a sort of a tribe, hopefully this is sort of a movement within us and an inspiration for others to join that community and look at what owning our whole selves might look like. So I think that's really been the inspiration for this book. We called it Homecoming, and we invite you today to go on a similar journey for yourself. You might look at parts of your past, present, and future contexts and take away some learnings, take away some reflections. Maybe there are parts of yourself that you may leave behind here. Maybe there are new paths and insights that you may carry forward. And the hope really is for all of us to be mental health ambassadors. This idea of lived experience expertise is often undermined, certainly in our own minds, as we went through this process. And as you know, some of us work in the field of mental health. And so for us, when we work with clinicians, we always think, well, science and evidence and clinical expertise should really tell us which way to go. And there's a sense of undermining or often just abandoning one's own belief system and experiences. And so this has really been a journey to be in touch with that, and perhaps to also invite clinicians and care systems and policymakers to look and learn and take away some key reflections. So we're hoping that the book can really be the start of that conversation. And across our organization, certainly at Amaha and at Children First, at the India Mental Health Alliance, we are seeing so many senior clinicians, mid-level clinicians, folks who are just graduating, looking at this as learning material. And then we recognize that, okay, this is actually collaboration that is needed between those who have lived these lives and what we've been through, and also those who are providing care. So that's really been the journey so far of the book. And with that, I think, we all look at mental health challenges, and some of the challenges that are in the book are quite significant in terms of either the longevity or the complexity or the severity of the challenges. We see real human spirit tested and tried and challenged, but we also see the small victories of that as we go through the pages of the book. And we see where community leaned in to give support, where we tapped into our own resilience and courage, and really brutally, honestly questioned parts of ourselves and our context. And so there is a reinvention and recreation of the self, in a sense, that's sort of been a bit of an internal journey, at least for me. And I'd love to invite Nandini to say a few words and share what this journey has been for her as well. And then we'll go across the all the contributors and hear from everyone for a few minutes. Towards the end, we'd love to hear from all of you. We often look at mental health in the newspapers and as statistics. We look at it as big numbers, and we say 200 million people with, undiagnosed mental health conditions. We look at the suicide rates in the country. We look at the treatment gaps. So today is about the human experience, what it actually feels like to live those lives, and what we can learn and take away from that. So Nandini, come on over, and then we'll go around.
Thank you, Neha. It seems so fitting. If you recall, the idea of homecoming was seeded in Bangalore 2 years back, and now today it really, literally, and metaphorically is a homecoming in more ways than one. Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for holding this with me. Homecoming, as Neha mentioned, is a book about lived experience, mine, and the journeys of 10 remarkable women whose paths I had the profound responsibility to walk alongside with. When I think of these 11 women in the book who shared their journeys with me, the first word that rises for me is tenderness. Not for their struggle, but for the courage it takes to tell the truth of a life slowly, gently, without needing to perform strength. They did not offer me stories, they offered me presence, they offered me honesty, they helped me engage with my own vulnerabilities by engaging with their own vulnerabilities. They trusted me enough to let me witness their stories. And this witnessing was very, very sacred. It was sacred witnessing. It shaped me deeply. They helped me witness not just their struggles, but also what held them. Not just their hurts, but what helped them move forward. What does healing and recovering look like? To witness that was a sacred act. It shaped me deeply. Alongside their journeys was my own through suicide loss in a world that often has neither the language nor space for that kind of grief. Writing came into my life long, long before grief or loss. It came when I was 5 years old. It did not arrive as rescue, it arrived as expression, it arrived as exploration, a way to understand the world, to question, to name, to discover, to wonder, to explore, to be curious, to be joyous, and to give shape to inner life with honesty. Later, when grief and loss entered my life, writing became just what it was meant to be, a way of a way of holding tenderness, a way of holding truth gently, and to take up space without apology. Homecoming carries that work forward. It rests on the principle that lived experience is not a footnote in mental health and suicide care. It is knowledge, it is perspective, it is expertise gained through living, it is rebuilding, it is reflecting, and coming back to ourselves in a very organic and in a very authentic way. This is not performative resilience. This is a kind of resilience that grows slowly, roots deeply, and does not need permission to come back. I hope this book creates space for more voices and lived truths to emerge. And of course, more tenderness in how we talk and engage with mental health and suicide care in India. Because none of us is defined by what we have endured. Each of us is shaped by how we return back to ourselves. Slowly, gently, with agency, with authenticity, and with courage. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for honoring lived experience not as sentiment, but as wisdom.
Thank you very much, Nandini, and would love to hear from each of the other contributors. But before that, may we unveil the book? May I request all of us to just maybe pick up a copy each and share our journey of homecoming with everyone in Bangalore today.
I'll now invite each one of the contributors to come and share a few words, starting with Dr. Purnima Vishwanathan. She's an assistant professor of psychology who is an autistic adult with lived experience of bipolar disorder and complex PTSD, which deeply shapes her practice, teaching, and advocacy. She blends lived experience with clinical expertise to promote compassionate, evidence based care. Her work spans education, research, psychotherapy, and advocacy, aiming to strengthen mental health systems through empathy, inclusion, and professional integrity. Over to you, Purnima.
Thank you, Kainat. It's actually surreal for me to be standing here and sharing my story. The same story that was silenced, shame, asked to be kept hidden away. And today I'm here sharing the same story with all of you. What's also surreal is I'm talking about homecoming in Bangalore, because Bangalore is the first place that felt like home for me. And I get to have my family here today. And I've met some of the most beautiful people in my life in Bangalore who lifted me up, who held me together, who still hold me together. So I'm Purnima. I'm an educator, a psychotherapist, and a researcher. I'm also a survivor of child sexual abuse, rape. I live with complex PTSD, bipolar 1 disorder, and autism. All of these identities, both the trained professional in me, but also this person who was broken open by pain, all these identities shape who I am today and my chapter in homecoming. when I was invited to share my story for homecoming, I kind of entered with all gusto, and I'm like, I've processed all of it, and all of these experiences are behind me. It's not going to affect me anymore. And I was really excited. But as the process went on, there it kind of hits you. It hits you very deeply, and sometimes the experience feels close. Sometimes it feels distant, but it's still a part of you, and it is still a part of me. Um, there were many years of my life, almost 6 years of my life, where I thought I wouldn't be able to get through life. Um, I was in excruciating pain. I was diagnosed with treatment resistant depression and then treatment resistant bipolar disorder. I had gone through ECTs. I had gone through medications, therapy, but it just felt like there was no more hope. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd think about, I don't want to be here, and why another day, and I don't want to live anymore. And none of this is ever going to change. I thought about death. I fantasized about death. I planned my death. I attempted. The only thing that kept going was all the people who were holding me, and just the thought of how much pain they would be in if I actually decided to kill myself. And that's how things were for a very long time. But then it did change, and it didn't change in a day, but it did change, and it wasn't a miracle. But I slowly started seeing hope. I started seeing joy, um, connection, love. And the pain is still there. The pain was still there. And there are days when I don't want to do it. But now I can pendulate between the pain and the joy and the hope. And the only reason for that, I am still surprised that I'm advocating for community, but I realized the power of community as I survived and as I wrote about my story in Homecoming. Because if it wasn't for my island of care, my people, um, my family, who've just been there, my partner, my parents, and my brother, my dogs and my cats, and my lovely friend. One of my friends, Bakul, is here today, and I think everybody should have a friend like Bakul, because she just sees right through my heart, and she knows what I'm experiencing when I don't know it, and it is just a beauty to feel witnessed like that. Um, Another important person in my journey is also Dr. Nithya Purnima, and she was like a guiding light. She's an angel in my life, and she just helped me pull through on the darkest of days when I just felt like I couldn't do anything anymore. Um, Community has just been so immensely powerful for me. I was this person who would just isolate myself. I was all like, I'll conquer this world on my own. And but people showed me what their power is, and how it is okay to kind of show your vulnerability. Be raw with the people around you, and they'll hold you. And sometimes they'll hold you gently. Sometimes they'll hold you firmly, but they don't let go. And to also be able to hold that space for them when they need it, and that's just so powerful. When I think about the chapter today, the chapter is called Darkness to Light and Pain Shapes Purpose. Though parts of sharing it, and when it comes back, it brings pain, but I don't think I'd have it any other way, because writing this and talking about my lived experiences and what people held for me, to be able to hold that for some people and maybe in some way to create a ripple effect, is my purpose at this point. And today is a celebration where we are celebrating stories of lived experience. But the question that I'm sitting with is, what if this was a daily conversation? What if these conversations and these narratives were spoken about, at work, at school, in college, in our over coffee, right? And how can we kind of place these narratives of lived experience, and how can we look at vulnerability as strength and courage and celebrate this on a daily basis? So I don't think the question should ever be, we really need to look at lived experiences and amplify lived experiences, but to really look at how can we afford to exclude lived experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Purnima, for sharing. I'll next invite Sidra. Sidra is a social working professional focusing on social impact and policy implementation with over a decade of experience. She is a quiet witness of failing systems, having lived with depression for over a decade, navigating the silences as both a shield and a weight. Her work spanning across rural classrooms, mental health circles, and government rules is always asking the question, what does dignity look like? She works and hopes in the spaces where pain meets policy and where care begins.
कायनात बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम. Thank you for being here. When I shared my story with Neha and Nandini, I wanted it to be anonymous. I didn't have the courage to put my name next to my story. And sometime during the course of last year, between me sharing my story and between the book coming out, there was a small familial discord that we were going through. And one of my relatives texted my father कि आपकी बेटी को तो डिप्रेशन है, उसकी तो कभी शादी नहीं होगी. Loosely translates as your daughter has depression, she'll never get married. Not that I'm married now, but and this was the time when I had disclosed my mental health concerns in professional spaces, but not in my personal life. But word travels, and then I thought to myself, if this person knows, then I think other people also know. So I texted Neha, Neha, just put my name next to my story, and I want to do this. And thank you. The issue that there is not just that people view mental health concerns as a taboo. The hardest part for me has been making people believe in my illness. So when I share my story and when people don't believe me, they question me or even worse, discredit me, and has happened for more than a decade now, not just by lay people, but by mental health professionals themselves. I think that becomes very difficult. And cut to today, where I stand here very proud, very privileged to be heard, supported, and believed by kind people like you who have chosen to be here on a Friday evening when I know there were better things to do, maybe. And that's the beauty of centering lived experiences, expertise in mental health conversation. People like us share our stories, and people like you come up to hear them. It doesn't just give us courage, but I absolutely believe that it gives confidence to other people who might be going through the same things and might not be able to share it. And I believe it will help build empathy in our mental health professionals as well. So today, I cry not because I'm upset. I cry because I think finally I'm allowed to. Because people like you are here to witness my journey, my pain, my tears. I want to end with a quote from Viktor Frankl, and he says, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So, this is me sobbing in front of 100 people, resisting in my own way to not fit my feelings and emotions in a neatly packaged success story, but to be true to myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sidra. Next, I'll invite Dr. Kavita Arora. Dr. Kavita is a child and adolescent psychiatrist with over 25 years of practice. She's a co founder of Children First and part of the founding cohort of India Mental Health Alliance. That's all. It took me, the reason I'm sending Kainat is how the introduction began, that I'm a psychiatrist. It took me 3 years to do my MD, but it took me another 12 years to speak about my mother's schizophrenia in public. Because the training that we get in medicine, even though I became a psychiatrist, does not include lived experience as expertise, does not credit stories and human experience as higher than what is posed as science and what one is supposed to learn. The first time I did that was in a space like this, where I was actually sitting in the audience, and there was a panel of experts talking about mental illness in Delhi in a very similar event. And there was a heated debate going on about how the portrayal of severe mental illness like schizophrenia was not done rightly in a particular movie in Bollywood, and how it ought to be done with a lot more of sanctity. And then somebody else said, well, there aren't many movies made anyway. And then somebody else said, but the police is also actually depicted in a very bad way. And that's what the debate was, till I put up my hand and I said, I'd like to say something as well. And I said, it doesn't matter what you say or do not say, at least talk about it, because it exists. It doesn't matter how you depict it, as long as you do. It doesn't matter whether you make fun of it or not, as long as you do. And I remember that was the first time I actually spoke about my mother and her illness, and took the name and the illness and my own name in the same sentence. It was a hall full of my colleagues as well. But it took that much and those many years for me to acknowledge this publicly. And from then on, another journey started for me till last year, when I was invited by Neha and Nandini to tell my story and let it have a different kind of set of wings. Because I do believe that once it gets out there, is written about, then it acquires a life of its own. And what you might make of it could be actually very different from what I might have tried to say in it. Because already in the last 2 years, since for the first time we spoke about it, I think I have traveled a journey. I've had conversations with my brother, with other members of the family, and realized that their versions are absolutely different from mine about the same incidents, about the same feelings, about the same events, even sometimes about facts. There are things my brother says I have done that I have absolutely no recollection of. My mother had schizophrenia. I was 1 year old when she had her first episode. We lived as a family. My brother's about a year and a half
elder to me. She's passed on now, but she's the only ever mother I will ever have. So my experience of motherhood as I was growing up was unique. I thought all mothers are like that because mine is like that. That is what family must be. So, how does a child growing up in a household where the household does not know any words to describe the behavior of the parent, how does this child grow up knowing that it could be different and that other households may be different? And actually, that's how I grew up. And I did not look at it as trauma. I did not look at it as adversity because I actually didn't have any comparison. According to me, I was having a very good childhood because in between the episodes, we had fun. And in between the episodes, I studied, I did my education, I went into sport, I read books, I made friends, I enjoyed badminton, we went out for picnics. But at other times, we got thrashed. So when I grew up and I was 20, 22 or so, and I realized it was schizophrenia, which was during my medical school. Because I read a paragraph in a book, in a forensic medicine book, not even psychiatry, which described exactly the symptoms that I thought my mother had. And I went home and I said, man, I've discovered this. Bhai, I think this is what mom has. And he said, of course, that's what she has. I was like, what do you mean? I said, you didn't know? I didn't know she was sick or this was an illness. And he said, of course, she's unwell. Dad told me when I was about 15. And nobody had registered that I didn't know. And in any case, if I was 14 or 15, what did I know about schizophrenia? So today, as I work with children and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I think I often end up treating that 14-year-old Kavita when I sit across children and when I sit across families. I still realize I'm healing myself. And that's usually one-on-one. But the book and the chapter and the story, I hope that this is a story that some little Kavita somewhere needs to hear. Because this was a story that I think in my healing journey, I need to tell. And I think stories are different, the ones that we need to tell and the ones that we need to hear at different times. So I hope somewhere these stories land in places where people needed to hear. And I hope it sparks off something in each one of you so that you wish to tell your story as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kavita. I'll now invite Dr. Firoza Godrej. Dr. Firoza Godrej is an art historian and cultural advocate, and she holds a PhD in ancient Indian culture and is the founder of the Simrosa Art Gallery.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening to all my colleagues on the stage. My beginning was very different. I met Neha the first time many years ago at the art fair, and I saw this very dynamic woman controlling artists, art gallerists, patrons, buyers, the press, and I was extremely, extremely impressed. There were strict rules to be observed, and we jolly well observed those rules. The next time Neha popped up into my life, and maybe I in hers, although I think she was more aware that I was going to be at this program than I knew about her. It was a leadership program, believe it or not. And we were in a session on leadership and health and issues that were bothering us. It was a parallel session with something in the other room, which was more important for leadership, like economics, finance, business admin. But I was surprised in this group. There was a mixed gender group of men and women, and we had to participate. You could not sit quiet because that's why you were in the group, to contribute and to learn. And we were from all walks of life. And it was a session that absolutely opened my eyes about the suffering that we quietly go through in our lives and don't talk about. The following year, this session became a plenary session. There was no parallel session. And we had business leaders participate, but silent. I don't think they really knew what they were brushing under the carpet. It is quite a common Indian trait that if you're feeling awkward about something or an issue, you don't talk about it. But that's wrong. We have to open up and talk about it so that other people can think about the suffering they're going through in silence. There is help out there, and we don't want to look at it. In this age, in this century, when communication and advocacy is so out there in the open, we see all the negatives, but why can't we see all the positives as well? So, flashback to today and homecoming. 2 years ago, when Neha and Nandini came to see me, I said, I'm not a participant to problems, but I'm a spectator. And I have been a spectator for almost 40 years. So my story is called Canvas of Compassion. Canvas because, as she started saying, I'm involved in the art world and I also admitted it. And compassion is something we all have, but we don't want to talk about that either. And that's disturbing. Emotions are kept within us, especially in the Oriental world. I don't know what happens in the Western world. I've not participated there much, but I'm sure it's there because there's a lot of violence and abuse. Why is there violence and abuse? Because there's no compassion. It hit me when my daughter was 10 years old. I am an educationist and I didn't know what was coming at me from the school, one of the leading schools in Mumbai, a pressure cooker of a school, who just couldn't understand what this highly creative, very outgoing, friendly, athletic child was going through academically. And it took us 2 years to find out that even with a very good IQ, her performance was terrible. And there was very little help available. The doctors, we went to the best, just said, go to the United States, go to the UK. I said, here we're in India. We have issues over here. My daughter is not the only one. Yes, we can afford to go, and we did go. But what about here? So collecting all this data. In the meantime, this child's life was terrible, really terrible, because what started as a learning disability led to frustration on both sides, led to anger, led to pretty frightening behavior, like running away from home and things like that. And we lived through it all as a family. I have another child who is very sympathetic, but young. They're 2.5 years apart. Also academically very progressive, very independent, always compensated for his sister's anger against me, and but not a very nice situation. Today she is 44, and I keep telling her, I'm going to talk about you. She said, there's nothing to talk about me. Why are you telling the whole world about me? I said, I'm telling the whole world about you because I love you. And you're very normal, but what crept in was obsessive compulsive disorder, which makes everybody dysfunctional in a family. You cannot wait for hours for a child to get out of a bathroom, though that was not a problem. You cannot wait for hours for a child to get ready to catch a flight. That was a problem. You cannot wait for a young adult to take 3 or 4 hours to leave the hotel room if you're traveling. And these are all things that she loves to do. Travel, meet people, wanted to come here. And I said, but I'm not going to be an empty room for you to check that you haven't left anything behind. So next time Neha's arranging an event, we'll see that it is a place where we can put up a tent for you. So she laughed and realized what I was trying to say. We have really been through the gamut of another aspect, which is not nice because it has so many side effects. Medication. Medication is not the be all and end all of any form of, and the doctors will correct me if I'm wrong, is not the be all and end all of mental health. It's only maybe 10 to 15% maximum. The rest is a lot of hard work for which you need therapists and you need to have a very, very understanding family. Not only the parents, the siblings, but grandparents cannot sometimes understand. Ye kya ho gaya? Why is this issue? What is the problem? Why is she like this? And until we started going on family holidays when they were at 12, 13, 14, grandparents like to spoil their grandchildren and say, okay, we'll give you a holiday somewhere. And trauma hit. And both my parents, my mother and my father, were extremely understanding and said, please stop everything you're doing. Everything. You've got to stop everything and focus on like my daughter. And after about 5 or 6 years, my mother said, you need a life of your own as well. You've got another child. You're neglecting him. So be practical in how you're dealing with your daughter. And it was very good advice from a very wise woman. And that's what I've done. I've given 75% of my daily life to my family, which is very, very important. And because of that, I have a lot of support from my husband, my brother, his wife, their children, my husband's sister, their children. And today, I know that I'm here, but they're all there keeping an eye on her. She lives independently with just one helper in the house. And I feel secure that the family will always be there. And she's not that bad. Of course, people used to say in the years gone by, you need to institutionalize her. But have you ever seen what the inside of an institution is in India or abroad? They just put you into a padded room and you're told time out. When you behave, you'll be let out. Food is passed to you through a window. I mean, our children and our family members are not criminals. They need help. And as professionals, is this the best you can do? So one has to question the type of help you're seeking. So as I said, look at this situation, even if you have friends around you who have some odd, quirky behavior, or as we're growing up, don't we have the word that we used to use in school? Oh God, they're completely a duffer. Tell them not to read the paragraph. You will read the paragraph and the teacher will proceed. Special education was never around in my time. And today it's there and it's used, and counselors are there and they're used, but they're very, very few and far between. We have to look for them. But there, again, compassion counts, understanding counts. I'm only saying this because I think in the audience there are parents, there are siblings. We're not all, by God's grace, facing problems like this. But if you do see them around you, I really urge you to look at it with compassion, because if you do, you'll see all the smiles coming in front of you. There'll be people who have never had a kind word said to them who will suddenly start opening up to you. There were one or two people who met us in the foyer and wondered why I wondered, why is this person opening up? He's opening up because he's found a sympathetic ear. And that smile did everything for him. So I really appreciate, I also understand it's Friday night, but, and we're giving you too many serious thoughts, but reflect on them. And you know, the worst thing about this is the newspapers, in which I've mentioned to Neha several times. I'm really scared about the youth. Every day there's an article, small article in the paper about some IIT person, med school student, perfectly good job, committing suicide. That is not acceptable in a country like ours. We have to look out for our friends. We have to get that smile back on their face. We have to give that little hand holding, and you will not see all this sort of horrible news in the paper. We have no right. We have no right to be a witness to this. And in the flower of their youth, they're gone. And consider what their parents feel about it, their siblings feel about it. It's an irrecoverable loss. They're gone. So we all have OCD on a scale of 0 to 10. All of us have 2% of OCD. I promise you. You want to lock the door, you'll check the door, you'll see whether the tap is off, the gas is off, the car engine is not running. So please be a little caring and compassionate to bring that smile on. I can see people in the audience smiling. I don't know what's in your minds, but I'm glad you're smiling. Thank you so much for giving me this stage to express myself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Firoza. I'll now invite our final speaker for the night, Aparna Piramal Raje. She's an award-winning writer, speaker, and educator, and Aparna is the author of Chemical Khichdi.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha and Nandini, for arranging this amazing event, and to IMHA for having us all here. I'll just speak a little bit about myself, but I want to really talk about the impact of a book with lived experience in a country like us. So I've been living with bipolar disorder for the last 25 years. I had a first incidence of mania when I was 24, but it was not until I was 37 that I actually got an official diagnosis. So I'm just one of those millions of people who have been in the dark about their diagnosis and struggling with it, and not just me, but the people around me. And I've had some pretty bad experiences during this time of being really psychotic, having voices in my head, not being able to sleep, having to be rescued from places because I was not able to travel by myself or look after myself. And also, at the other extremes of times where I wanted to take my own life. But I'm happy to say that for the last 7 years, that hasn't happened. And for the last 7 years, I haven't had a manic episode. I haven't had that extreme of depression. And today I really say that I'm happy, I'm thriving, and I'm bipolar. That is part of my identity. And I think what Homecoming really represents is that hope for all of us, of women who have really fought to be on that journey of healing and recovery, who had so much courage. The courage in mental illness is actually not talking about it. Most people say that. The courage in mental illness is dealing with it and living that journey and choosing every day and to say that I will not be defeated by my illness. And once you've done that, and then once you find a community that's safe for you, becomes easy to share the story. But the courage is really that time when you've been so isolated and alone, and no matter how much family support you have, you're still having to choose every day to say, I am not going to get defeated by this. So that's really the courage that I want to applaud. Now, why is a book like Homecoming so important? So my book came out, Chemical Khichdi came out about 3 years ago. And I want to share what's happened since then. I'm hoping some of you might have come across it and read it. But since then, I remember a very important conversation with Neha in Juhu about a few years ago when it came out, or just before it was coming out. And she said, I want to write a book about my mother. And I looked at her and I said, you need to write a book about yourself, Neha. You need to write about the fact that you've been living and taking care of your mother since the time you were almost 5 years old. And you've had all this trauma that you've been through. And yet you are doing these amazing things, so many amazing things in your life, without, all the support that many of us might have. And I feel really proud today that, she's had many sparks of conversations with many people along the way. But that little spark in some way has contributed to this bigger spark of Homecoming. And not only is she sharing her own story, but she's sharing the story of 10 other people, and that may inspire another 100 people to come forward, or another 1,000 people, or 100,000 people to come forward and share their stories with someone. So, thank you to Neha for being this spark, and so proud that Chemical Khichdi has played a role in that. But what does this book matter? Why does Homecoming matter to to you and me, to everyone around us? I'll share a few more stories. I've had the most incredible reader feedback from my book, and it's amazing how universal mental health is. So I've had a story from person in America, and the book is not even really marketed there, but he got a hold of it, and he's about the same age as me. He's got 2 kids. He's been an entrepreneur. And he says, Aparna, every page I'm reading, I feel that your story is my story. Your husband came to rescue you. My brother came to rescue me. And, all things like that. And there was really a connect. And at the same time, I get a message from a woman in Nagpur writing to me in Hindi. And she's saying that मैंने आपकी किताब डिक्शनरी के साथ पढ़ी क्योंकि मैं मराठी मीडियम में एजुकेटेड हूँ. Yeah. Anyway, so I read your book in Hindi with a dictionary because I'm a Marathi medium educated, and my son suffers from depression. My husband, who's a doctor, suffers from depression, but at least he finished his service. But my son, we just don't know how every day is going to work out. And he said, "आपकी किताब ने नई उम्मीद जगाई है हमें." And look at this lady from Nagpur who's writing to me in Hindi, having used a dictionary to read my book. And this person in America, who's from a totally different background, but they're united by the same need for the search for hope and to listen to people who are sharing their stories, who are sharing their lived experience, who are providing mirrors to them and say that, yes, what happened to you is also happening to me. And this is how I can get hope. One of the most amazing stories I got was from a woman who used to work with a multinational bank in Bombay. Her name is Madhumita. And she wrote to me, she's saying, I listened to your story on Audible and I have quit my, multinational banking job and I'm working with the homeless mentally ill people in Calcutta. So that is not asking you to quit your jobs. But it was an amazing story that she said, I was looking for something like this to do, and this was the impetus. Or somebody who's read my book and who said that I want to start a foundation and donate money and build a charity that will work for mental health people and work people with mental illness and work with the government to do that. So these are the kind of just amazing stories that happen. Even in this audience today, there was someone who came up to me and said that, I've read the book and it's had an impact. So this is what the ripple effects that I hope will happen with Homecoming. And I think the people who most need to read it is really the medical community, the mental health practitioner community. I get messages from students who read it, but I think the best interaction I had was with some psychiatrists. I've done a lot of talks since this has come out, a few with psychiatrists. And so he was hearing me talk. And then I said, yeah, I've, been in a good place for the last 7 years. And he said, okay. Then I said, doctor, I'm trying to tell you, I haven't taken olanzapine for the last 7 years. Okay. Then he said, oh, wow, you really made a recovery then. So I think that and he said, Aparna, listening to you, I realized I need to ask more questions to my patients and not just prescribe medication to them. So what I'm trying to say is I think Homecoming is an even more powerful book in that way because it talks about a diversity of experience, women from all backgrounds with different conditions, and it's got so many clinicians in there who have themselves experienced mental health challenges either for themselves or for their members of the family. So I'm really hoping that with this book we can spark a movement of lived experience stories and really dismiss this idea कि वो तो पागल है उसको क्या पता है, which is something that we've all grown up with. वो तो पागल है, वो तो mental problem है, वो तो that kind of language that we have all grown up with. And even though I would say that I'm not in a stage where I'm having those extremes of conditions, I'm still at a stage where I deal with a lot of intensity of emotions. And just this morning, actually, I was totally in tears on the flight, and the guy luckily next to me was very discreet about the whole thing. And just Sidra, to your point, I was really unhappy about something. And so I texted a friend. I said, I know you're not going to do anything, but I just need you to witness this, and that is the powerful role of witnessing, of to say that I can hold space for you. I am not going to judge you. I am going to be empathetic. I'm not going to tell you what to do because I know you're not asking me about that, but I'm just going to be there for you. So I think that as you are here today, please spread the word about this so that really, as Feroza said, we can build a much more compassionate and a much more courageous and a much more empathetic society. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna, and all the contributors for those stories and those sharings. When we were thinking about the name of this book, it made sense to talk about resilience in some way, although it's a bit of a overrated, overused word. But it made sense to talk about healing. But this idea of wholeness is something that is very dear to me personally, but I think to all of us. And you've heard bits of our introductions here and there, and various badges of honor and successes, and all the things that the world wants to see, and the shiny parts of our personality, the kind of things that we slog our whole lives to earn as recognition, external validation. But this idea of wholeness is really about integrating and harmonizing your inner world and the outer world, right? It's really about coming home to yourself and being comfortable and thriving in your own skin. And so I think actually the one story that we haven't really talked about is the other parts of my life. And so, just to say that as someone who, at the age of 5, started experiencing what were absolutely paranoid, crazy, parental, violent discord symptoms at home, had no vocabulary or understanding in the 80s. For what this was. And, as little kids, me and my younger brother would just attribute that to parents not getting along, financial problems, something or the other in the neighborhood, perhaps, but we could never really understand why there was so much dysfunctionality in our families. Kavita talked about this revelation at the age of 14. And actually, when I was 14, by then we recognized that what was happening was my mother was going through untreated and undiagnosed schizophrenia. And at that stage, she actually took the decision to leave home. And basically, we spent the next 10 years of our lives looking for them, my mother with my younger brother, across the country. We found them twice and we lost them twice in that period of 10 years. And so just imagine growing up through school and going to college and trying to fit in, trying to play sport to get tired and crash, trying to fit into social circles. I felt like a complete imposter everywhere I went. Wanted to be a fly on the wall, as invisible as possible. Just go completely unnoticed, and that would be great in terms of a social interaction. To realizing that actually this was a cat and mouse chase over 10 years, where people in our neighborhood, in our friend circle, no one really knew what to do with us. We were just this crazy family that crazy things happened to. And I have realized in the last 10 years that it's not so crazy and it's not so different. And I've met so many people who have very similar stories of relatives going missing, of people being abandoned, of people dying along the way before they got any sort of treatment. So for me, really, it was homecoming on the same date 10 years later in 2004 when we found my mother chained to a hospital bed in Nepal and my younger brother, who was now 22, wanting to come back and get treated and get back into life, so to say. We literally spend the next 4 or 5 years in and out of all these horrific inpatient centers, getting treatment, trying to find the diagnosis, trying to find the right treatment solution, trying to get psychiatrists to talk to each other and agree on what needs to be done. And my mom got better. And it's been 14 years. She takes one injection every 3 weeks and 20 years plus of untreated, undiagnosed schizophrenia. And there is something to say about, I suppose, luck and destiny and all of that. But here is someone who is currently watching over my 13-year-old in Mumbai while I'm here with you. Now, the collateral damage of all of that we don't realize is what's happening to the rest of us. While the focus of attention is on this one person and their suffering, what is happening to the children in that home? How are the spouses and siblings and other people coping with that? And that's really the invisible sort of trauma, the caregiver burden, the burnout, whatever you might call it. My brother, who suffered out of school, homeless, without education for a period of 10 years, and then wanted to come back and fit in, topped the A levels, went to Cambridge, and then didn't go to class. My brother, who wanted to make a life in finance and in technology, started his own organization, raised money, but couldn't sort of come to terms with the battles within him. Towards the end, it really was too little treatment, too late in the day, and almost his impatience with the medical system, with friends, with family, to say, if you can't make me feel better, then I'm going to leave. And it was the last 2 years or so was almost a race against the clock, with him wanting to actually find and educate himself about finding the most pain-free way to go, while all of us were trying to rush in and help him stay alive for one more day. And so these stories, as we've all been in and out of mental health centers, today as we work with clinicians in our organizations across Amaha and Children First, we have over 200 clinicians. And they have learned so much from these stories. I mean, it's incredible. The biggest revelation to me was how much there is to learn from our own stories and how much of that is invisible to the clinicians that we go to as the experts in the room. And so I'm really hoping that there are bits of these stories that can really sit with us. I'm sure there's a 5-year-old, 20-year-old, 40-year-old version of yourselves that you may be having a dialogue with right now. Maybe you'll go away and talk to a family or a friend. Maybe you'll recommend the book. So there's something for everyone to take away. But really, to be able to create a movement of change, we have to all be able to own and share our stories. This idea of being whole, becoming whole, and showing up as whole is very, very powerful. And so I'd like to share that gift with all of you and maybe invite you. I know that there are many people in the room who are here because you've had your own experiences with mental health challenges. How many of us are carers in the room? Perhaps a show of hands for those who have somebody with mental illness in their families. So many of us might have dealt with depression or anxiety or OCD, so many of these challenges that we talk about in the book. And perhaps there are those who have also lost someone to suicide. And and these are such lonely journeys for all of us. We have navigated these on our own in our small circles of comfort and safety. But I'm really happy that we have the privilege of being part of a book and being here on a Friday night, having this wonderful conversation about something so meaningful to everybody here. And I'm sure we will make meaning and create meaning from this, wherever we might go here on. So here's to a great Friday evening. Thank you.